asked me whether they wanted it as a countdown or a count up, and I said we'll do the countdown. So we want to make sure we leave some time for questions. I'm not sure that our mics are live yet.
When we start seeing the clock, though.
Well, greetings, and thank you very much for staying here this afternoon for our last session. I'm Neil Hamilton, a professor of law and director of the Agricultural Law Center at Drake University. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to moderate this session on one of my favorite subjects, which is how we support our next generation of farmers and ranchers. And I want to commend the organizers and USDA for including this subject. I think as we've heard today, there are a broad array of issues and topics that face agriculture in America, and many of these are contentious. Some of them are even partisan sometimes, but I think there's one topic on which there's general agreement and support, and that is the need for us to help support the next generation of farmers and ranchers. You know, this is a critical issue for the nation, for the USDA. Secretary Vilsack 2 years ago appointed a land tenure subcommittee to study these issues as part of the New and Beginning Farmer Advisory Committee. I had the opportunity to chair that committee, and we came up with a series of recommendations. I think there were over 50, Chris, if I remember, many of which were things that the USDA staff have been working on. And I'm pleased that Secretary Perdue and USDA are continuing that effort. And today we had the opportunity to witness the Secretary and Steve Record from SCORE enter into a memorandum of understanding concerning a new mentorship program that USDA is undertaking. And so our topic for this panel is a broad one about supporting new and beginning farmers, but we're going to begin our focus and discussion looking at what this may mean, this new memorandum of understanding and program that the USDA and SCORE are implementing. And it's a real pleasure to introduce a person who had his hands on this idea, an old friend of many of us in the room, Chris Beyerhelm, an Iowan who spent his career with USDA and now is acting administrator of the Farm Services Agency. Chris was on that subcommittee and has been laboring for the last year and a half to see that these series of recommendations around new and beginning farmers are implemented. And I know that he was very involved in developing this idea, so I'm going to ask Chris to give us a little bit more of the context as to how we got to where we are today and what this means within USDA. Chris?
Thanks, Neil. It's good to be back home in Iowa. Moved out to DC about 11 years ago, and I want to again thank everybody that has stayed for this presentation. As Neil said, we've been working on this issue for a long time, and if we had the time to take a poll of all the folks in the room and ask you what the 3 biggest impediments to entry-level producers would be, I suspect that your list would be access to land, access to capital, and access to technical assistance. And surprise, surprise, that list was the same in 1980 when I started working on this issue, and I suspect it'll be probably that same for a long time. Now, that doesn't mean we're not making progress on some of those things, and I think the announcement about the SCORE MOU today is a good example of some of the progress we are making in some of those areas. So at USDA, as Neil said, we've been working on all of these issues, and a lot of you work on these issues also, folks at state level, local level, nonprofits work on these issues. Each one of those issues could be weeks and weeks of conversation alone. Today, because of the Secretary's announcement on SCORE, I want to just concentrate my remarks today about how we got here on the SCORE memorandum today. So about technical assistance. So what we do as a USDA team is we sit down and we talk about what resources do we have at USDA, what resources do we think states and local folks have and NGOs have to address each of these issues. And when we sat down and talked about the technical assistance one, we went through the list of resources and we got to the local communities and we said, what are the resources they have? And it just hit us like a ton of bricks. I come up from a very small town here in Iowa, and I just remember all of the retired folks we had living in that small town. We had retired bankers and lawyers and accountants and agribusiness people and farmers and ranchers themselves. And what a great cadre of knowledge to tap into. So then our next question was, how do we harness that? How do we get them in critical mass to be able to help our beginning farmers and ranchers? And again, it hit us like SCORE has been around for 50 years, have a great track record on helping new businesses, not necessarily farming and ranchers, but any kind of business get started. So we got a hold of SBA, who helps administer the SCORE program, and luckily hooked us up with Steve here, who really took a passion to this. So we've been working together to see how we can leverage what SCORE already has. They have 11,000 mentors out there. They have some agricultural expertise, but need more. So USDA's role in this MOU is to recruit local folks. People at FSA and NRCS work in these communities. We know who these retired folks are. We're going to recruit them. Steve's group is going to train them. And then the other piece that USDA is going to do is, as we work with the beginning farmer and rancher, and we see that they're struggling with accounting or business planning or any aspect of farming and ranching, we're going to recommend to them that they contact SCORE and get hooked up with a mentor. Our research shows, and I'm sure Steve is going to talk a little more about it, is how much more the percentage of success for beginning any kind of business is enhanced when you have a mentor. So Neil, that's how we got here today.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. And if you haven't been out in the corridor and stopped at the FSA table, I encourage you to. They have brochures and information about how you can sign up, and maybe we'll ask you about that as we do the next go-round. But you know, USDA was very fortunate to have already in place a program like SCORE. USDA didn't have to go out and create a mentor network, but instead had the long history and successes, Steve, that your organization has. So you might tell us a little bit about you and a little bit more about SCORE and how SCORE came to this relationship with USDA.
Sure. Well, so at SCORE, we really believe that experience matters. And we've all heard that experience is that thing you get right after you needed it. And all too often, that experience comes from a hard lesson. And so we were built off of this principle that what would happen if you're not alone? Being a business owner, being a farmer, it's a lonely gig sometimes. What happens if we can make some of those hard lessons that people learn a little easier, or perhaps avoid them altogether? And so SCORE was born out of that idea of experience mattering, being able to give back, being able to have that next generation of business owners learn from our mistakes and think outside of the box and bring a different perspective to ensure that the business, whatever type of business it is operating in a sustainable, profitable manner. And the great thing about it is that it works. 93% of entrepreneurs have admitted that having a business mentor was instrumental in their success. And more importantly, if you have a business mentor, you are twice as likely to still be in business 5 years later than if you don't have a business mentor. So the idea of having someone to be able to bounce ideas off of, being able to talk through problems, being able to talk about, is this the right investment, is this the right loan, all of those things that all of you face every day, it's proven valuable time and time. And so we do have 11,000 of our businessmen and women across the country. About half actually are still working, and so they're up in their own businesses, in their own industries, looking and facing some of the same challenges, and so they can bring a whole new, different experience to the farmers and ranchers that are starting, and the current farmers and ranchers that are looking just to optimize or even transition. Many of you that own a farm or own a small business, you didn't do it to get rich, you didn't do it for the prestige, you did it because it's a passion or perhaps a family legacy. And so running that business is the hard part of it. The passion and the energy is there, but it's all that other stuff that is hard, and that's where SCORE can help.
Well, let me ask you one more question about SCORE. I mean, what are your most effective tools in terms of reaching those new business people, those entrepreneurs who may not think that they either need a mentor or even know that your program exists?
Yeah, one of the, I guess, secrets of it is that we can't really help someone that doesn't believe they need help. And so we'll rely on our partners and all of you to, talk about the value of a mentor, whether the business is truly operating profitably now or not. Oftentimes when a business is growing is when they need a mentor the most, because there will be a point in time where things aren't as good as they've been. And all too often we do see businesses come to SCORE and ask for help when we could have probably helped them more 6 months before they asked. And so it does take two to tango. All that said, last year SCORE's clients started more than 54,000 businesses across the country and created nearly 79,000 jobs, all while adding hundreds of millions of dollars of new economic activity into the local economy. So when it works, it works. And we would just like to make sure that everyone that is thinking about, in the process of starting or currently operating a small business, a farm or ranch, know that SCORE's available.
I'm not going to let you off yet. I've got one more question. What would be the thing that you would tell Chris and the folks in his shop at FSA is probably the most important thing they can do in terms of how they go out and reach their farm borrower clientele and the people they work with and the FSA field staff in terms of how they sell this program or how they make people know about it?
I believe that part of the value of SCORE is why we exist. And I talked about what we do and sort of how we do it, but we exist because our volunteers want to give back. And they do it out of their own passion. This is how they pay it forward, if you will. There's no compensation. There's nothing other than wanting to see someone else be successful. And so if you really look at why our organization works, it's because we have those 11,000 folks donating millions of hours of their time for no other reason than to help someone else gain some success, be a more profitable business, help their families, and help our economy.
So the message to FSA and Chris's shop is, here's this incredible resource out there that is yours for the asking if you'll take the step.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
We're here and ready, and as a mission-driven organization, it's quite honestly an easy sell, I believe.
Well, certainly that area of technical assistance, and there's so many parts of agriculture that are important for new and beginning farmers, and we're going to hear Tim's story here in a little bit. But one of those groups certainly is the financial community, the bankers, the accountants, and we're very fortunate in Iowa, and today to have on our panel Mike Hein. Mike's a banker from Durant, but most recently has served as the chair of the American Bankers Association Ag and Rural Bankers Committee.
That's great.
And so your bankers, your current bankers, your former employees are going to be one of those audiences that USDA and SCORE hope will become part of this. So your thoughts or reactions to this idea and the potential that you see that might be there?
Very positive. First of all, the diversity in agriculture and the sophistication in agriculture has grown so much in the last number of years that our farm customers have come to us for a long time for advice on a lot of different things. But we've got activities taking place in agriculture now that have grown well beyond our means of providing good, valuable information in some situations. But before I go any further, I kind of want to give a little acknowledgement or some recognition to FSA, because through the years, they have been very instrumental in providing us with the tools and the programs for us to help put beginning farmers into business, keeping them in business, and through the 1980s and early 1990s, actually giving us the programs to definitely help keep people in business over that period of time. And so we couldn't do what we are doing today without a lot of the programs and a lot of the help from our people at our FSA office, and a lot of things that they do through their direct lending programs are very instrumental in getting people into our beginning farmer roles that they play in our communities. And while we have I think that beginning farmers have taken on a lot of different definitions in the last number of years. We still, we have our large producers out here, and we've got our smaller producers, and our smaller producers are still a very important part of our rural communities and our rural economies, because they are the people who are putting kids into our school systems. They're the ones who are providing a demand for the products and the services of our downtown rural businesses. And so our small beginning farmers are still a very, very important part of our rural communities and our rural economies. And so keeping them in business and providing them with the expertise, and particularly the technical expertise, to take their small operations and continue to grow them into the dreams that they have is very important for all of us. So having said that, we've got producers out here now. If we go back into just 10 years ago, the cost of putting our crops into the ground, we're a fraction of what we have to deal with today. And so we've got some very large operations commanding some very large volumes of loans, and the risk that are there is sometimes you can't afford to make that first mistake, because it can put you out of business. And so, as you said, we just don't have the time, we don't have the resources to necessarily try to learn from mistakes. And if we can put people together, and that is sometimes the challenge, is taking the people who need knowledge and getting them together with the people who have the knowledge to coordinate some things and do some mentoring. I think there's a great opportunity here with SCORE to help continue to grow our young guys, and even some of our mature operations that are trying to go to the next level.
And so you're optimistic that your colleagues, the other bankers, the rural bankers around the state and the nation, either working now or retired, will be interested in volunteering and signing up and being part of a program like this?
I do, Neil, and I think that as both Steve and Chris have said, is that we need to recruit the expertise into our SCORE chapters, and we need to get the recognition out there from our banking community and from our business communities to know that there is a resource out here for our people to work with, because I work with individuals of for the most part, very common backgrounds and very common type of operations. But every once in a while, you come across an individual who wants to do something that you have no familiarity with. And the only thing you can, in those situations, the last thing you want to do is give anybody bad advice. And so where do we turn to? Do we say, okay, yeah, there's a bank down someplace else that has some experience with this. Why don't you go talk with them? Nah, I don't really want to send that guy out my door, and have him become somebody else's customer. So if I know that I've got somebody at SCORE that can help mentor this person, and we can work together to help get this person to where he wants to go, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable talking with somebody from SCORE than I would be making another recommendation to go someplace else.
Well, thank you. Well, certainly one of the sources of technical expertise and assistance that agriculture has counted on for the last 80 years has been extension, and extension through our land grant system. Extension's gone through a number of changes, just like agriculture has, but we're fortunate to have with us today Madeline Shultz, who works with Extension and is the Women Project coordinator. I know you do a lot of work both with new and beginning farmers and with YFAN and the Women Landowner Network, and so share with us your perspective on how this SCORE USDA MOU both relates to what Extension does, but also to the networks that you've been helping serve in recent years.
Well, I'm super excited about this opportunity with SCORE, because we believe that when women are supported and encouraged to develop their businesses, that they will do a great job of that and really add to the economic development in our rural areas. And so I can think just of a few examples here. For example, Nicole Jonas came to my Annie's Project class a few years ago, and she had just kind of been playing around with growing some ornamental plants and selling them. And we wrote business plans in that class, and it was the first time that she actually thought of that activity as a business. And I'm happy to report that today she is earning a full-time income from her plant business, and she also employs several other people in that plant business. So that's one great example where somebody had the skill set but just needed a little extra technical assistance to help them turn an idea into a real business. Another young lady that was in Shane Ellis's Annie's project over in Sac County, she carved out a corner of the family corn and soybean farm for hops production. And a year ago, she increased her plants to 500 plants. She has a marketing contract for her hops and is just really enjoying being a business owner. And again, just a little encouragement and support of her ideas, and she's able to create this successful business. And sometimes women in ag are just helping their families to expand their business. Gayleen Mollers, a dairy farmer from Northeast Iowa, is a great example of that. She had worked off the farm for years, and then as the family business was growing and they wanted to bring 2 young sons into that dairy business, she became full-time in the farm too. She came to one of our human resource management classes, went home and wrote job descriptions for everyone, started employee evaluations on a regular basis, put up standard operating procedures in the milking parlor. So again, just really taking hold of this technical assistance, putting it to good use, and growing that family business. One other thing I want to mention is that we're seeing more and more young women taking over the family farm. And Brandy Wegg from Manning, from near the Manning, Iowa, is doing that with the Sturvey farms. And so she is taking over the family beef, corn, and soybean farm from her parents. So again, she was one of our women who participated in a program we call Managing for Today and Tomorrow about transition planning. So these are just some examples of technical assistance and how we really are seeing agriculture benefit from these types of programs. So that's why I'm really excited about the SCORE opportunity.
Well, Madeline, do you, in your work, have you seen in many ways a shortage of the availability of that type of technical assistance? And is that the niche that USDA and SCORE can fill by providing kind of a deeper bench, a more widely available set of mentors?
I think it really is, because what we see a lot of times is that beginning farmers and rural entrepreneurs, they have really great ideas about producing things, producing goods and services, but they don't always have that financial experience or that marketing experience and how to understand some of the contracts they may be dealing with, things like this, how to put together that pro forma financial plan. So they really do need some additional help with that. It's something that they do struggle with. So I see that SCORE could be very helpful with that. Great.
Well, thank you. You know, as we think about new and beginning farmers, we oftentimes think of people who are trying to break into agriculture. The Agricultural Law Center at Drake has sponsored several national forums on new and beginning farmers, and many of oftentimes looking at those smaller scale farms. But at the same time, an important part of this issue is the issue of family succession and transition plans, and working with existing farm operations, and how it is that they make those smooth transitions to the next generation, which can sometimes be complicated if there are a number of siblings but only one of them is on the farm, or we have to figure out how in fact the operations are managed. But today, since it's a program on new and beginning farmers, I think the USDA thought it'd be valuable to have one with us, and so we're fortunate to have Tim Couser with us from Nevada, I believe, or Nevada up in Story County, and he has certainly a deep bench of a family mentor program that he's coming up through. But I'm interested in your thoughts on both mentorship and how you can see this role that USDA and SCORE is carving out.
I'm the young buck that you chose to come in today, and I'm not a beginning farmer, I'm a relay farmer. I'm third generation. So when you look at that and you say, you know, I didn't start with nothing. I started with a previous business and have to continue it. And the risk and the pressure that gets put on you to continue that, it sometimes can be a little bit overwhelming. Mentorship is very present in our everyday operation of our farm. It takes many different views. Obviously, my grandfather and my father, having 60 plus years of farming, I don't need to recreate the wheel. I don't need to start over. I can take all their hard work and effort and utilize that. But the trouble is that things are changing pretty quick. And I think the university extension would admit to that things are changing so quick that they have a hard time testing every new product, every new practice. I mean, look at the last two panels talking about everything that's changed in the last 10 years. The ethanol revolution has changed the corn grower in this state. So mentorship is extremely important to me. It takes many different forms, and I'd say my favorite form is social media. And there's many different platforms that I go off of. Periscope is currently my most favorite, then Twitter. Facebook's probably last, and even Snapchat. Now, when I was a freshman in college, Facebook was just getting started. And it was only for college students at the time. And it probably wasn't used for family pictures and everything else at that point in time. It was used for finding women, for finding someone on your same floor. And so that was 10 years ago. And so Snapchat's the new thing today. So put yourself 10 years ahead of where we are today. I mean, is my dad going to be on Snapchat in 10 years? So we have to think that this thing's changing pretty quick. You got to keep up with the millennials. You have to supply them mentorship in the way they want it presented. Otherwise, they're not interested. So, and like it was stated here earlier, you have to admit that you need some help. So a lot of times through social media or on your phone, you feel that you can do that privately, and that's not a public meeting with someone, and you can do that on a daily basis. So,
and mentorship actually takes a whole different view in different generations, and we see this with a lot of our clients of millennial or Gen X and younger, is that they would prefer to be with a group of their own generation talking about their own problems versus even cross-generational. So it is a multifaceted mentorship level.
And SCORE has that capacity built into it because being of a different generation by at least a couple steps, I'd need a long lesson on social media before I could spend much time relating to someone, but because that's where you live and many of your counterparts live. And that's going to be a challenge for SCORE, I would think, and a challenge for USDA as you try to bridge those generational divides in terms of the use of technology.
It can be, like as I mentioned before, about half of our volunteers are actually working, and so the demographics of our volunteers are really quite diverse. And so we do have the ability to use all sorts of technology. We have recently done research projects in what mentorship is like virtually, specifically using video chat, whether it's Google Hangout or Skype or something like that, and found that it's just as an engaging experience for our clients and our volunteers as even sitting down face to face. And there's a whole convenience factor, an on-demand factor. And the reality of today's world is everything's instantaneous on demand. And so if you have to wait 3 days to get a phone call to go then meet someone in person, that may have been okay 10 years ago, but it's really not okay now. And so we as SCORE are adapting to that as well.
Well, Tim, let me ask you one more question. I mean, what would you tell Chris and the USDA and the FSA shop from your perspective as someone who's kind of the clientele or the new and beginning farmer that they're hoping is successful and being able to help serve you and however you may need it? What do they need to know? What do they need to hear from you?
I don't think you have to recreate the wheel. That mentorship is already there in multiple different sources. It's getting kids access to it and finding it. So that happens many different ways. And you know, here's a scenario like our commodity groups could easily take advantage of. I have to take a full day off away from the farm to go to a meeting, to listen to multiple speakers, and I hope to get one good idea from that to take back home. And I like all the farm conferences, the top producers, the farm futures. I try to attend those. There are some high quality speakers that go to those. But honestly, for our commodity groups, for Extension, for a lot of these other programs, can't they just get on a Facebook Live or a Periscope or something and do a daily, a weekly feed and update? The recent trip to China, there was a Snapchat feed going on every day. I was looking at what they were doing in China. I mean, just that is so awesome, so easy. So I don't think you have to recreate the wheel. You have to put people in the right place to find that.
And Neil, I would just interject that I've already think that we've changed our strategy, because I think we originally thought about focusing on retired folks, but obviously we need to recruit people like Tim to be mentors to people of his same generation. And Tim, I've never heard that term relay farmer before. I love that.
I haven't either.
I like that. I realize it.
We should have used that in our,
our
committee.
I want to say too, I mean, I'm not saying that there's a true substitute for face-to-face interaction. Obviously, there's nothing better than having a cup of coffee with my grandfather. And anybody that farmed through the 80s, you have to give them an ear. I mean, that's stuff that you just can't get anywhere else. So there's a time and place for that. The point here is that we're busy. We put in our mind that we're busy. We like to act busy. It makes us feel useful. So that's an easy way to engage with the younger crowd.
Well, we know you're all busy too, and so we wanted to leave a little time for questions before we would wrap this up. And as you're sitting there trying to figure out if you have a question to ask, and I think Esther and some of our folks from USDA have some microphones. Other comments, observations from anyone else on the panel? Reactions to anything that you've heard here?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I thought Tim made a good point in that, at one point it was not a problem for us to have people come in to see us, but their schedules, and Tim alluded to that, I've got customers the same way, their schedules are demanding, and sometimes if we want to get together, I'm planning things maybe a week or two in advance with some of our larger, more integrated type of operations to fit into their schedule, not them fitting into mine. And so, yeah, the delivery of the services is very key, particularly through the communication channel.
Are you saying there's no such thing as banker's hours anymore?
If you carry a cell phone, there is no off time.
Well, let's see if there are any questions in the audience. And if there aren't, of course, as a professor, I've got a whole list of them, but I'd rather hear questions from anyone out there. We have one right over here, down front. Raise your hand again so she sees you. There we go. And another one back in the middle. Thank you.
What a great panel. My question's a little bit...
You're on.
My question's a little bit off the mark from what the purpose of the panel is, but I'd like to hear your reaction to what the executive from POET said, that we're on the verge of an ag crisis. Could you all address that?
I can take a shot at that. To put it in perspective, my definition of an ag crisis is what we saw in the 1980s, where we saw interest rates in the 20s. We saw land values decline by 15 or 20% a year. I'm not an economist. I certainly wouldn't agree that we're on the verge of anything that drastic. But certainly with commodity prices below cost of production in a number of commodities, I know that at Farm Service Agency, we make a lot of beginning farmer farm ownership loans. We make them for 40 years. We base them on a cash flow with profitability obviously expected. So with some of the prices we're seeing in some of the commodities, some of those cash flows are at risk. So I certainly see an uptick in default rates. Land values are going down in some places, which is not a good sign from a collateral position. So I see storm clouds on the horizon, but I certainly wouldn't say that I would predict anything close to what we saw in the 80s.
I would add that there's a different take off of that if you look at the trends of just farming in the U.S., I think there's currently a little over 3 million farmers actively farming, 2 million some odd farms, give or take, but those numbers have been steadily declining. And the average age of the American farmer steadily is increasing. And so I think the concern, the storm clouds that I see from a just sustainable industry standpoint is, do we have the next generation actively engaged? Do we have enough of them actively engaged to continue the current operation regardless of what it is?
I was glad to hear Tim say that either your father or your grandfather were reminding you of the consequences of the 1980s and keeping that kind of in the back of your mind, or it was being at least placed in the back of your mind that these are the types of things that can happen. We still have bankers out here the same way who have not forgotten the 1980s, and I think that our bank regulation people have not forgotten those times either, and so they continue to keep us reminded that we were not on this one-way trajectory that we thought we were in the 1980s. And so that's not to say that there aren't going to be some casualties if we continue to see the economy be soft as it is right now. We've had some people who have been kind of living on the edge, so to speak, with leverage and the manner in which they are trying to establish their business modules. Some of those are going to work and some of them aren't, but I don't, as Chris said, I don't necessarily see us spiraling into a crisis at this point, but certainly not immune from seeing some casualties out there.
And I would agree with that too, Mike. In extension, I know that some of my colleagues are working with farmers who are struggling financially. And of course, we're very concerned about this and want to provide that assistance. But we're not seeing a widespread struggling like there was in the 80s or spiraling downwards. So while there is some trouble out there, it's more limited.
And Steve alluded to the fact that we see a continuing increase in the age of our average farmers. And I would tell you that these two machines sitting to our right and to our left are part of the reason for that, because I mean, when I grew up, my younger years, I remember most people were retiring at age, upper 50s, lower 60s, because their body couldn't take the physical demands of what it required to continue to farm today. These machines, I mean, they can do just about everything from their tractor cab that they can from the recliner in their bed or living room right now. It's a very, we've taken a lot of the physical demands out of agriculture, and we see people now farming well into their 80s. And so, that's part of the reason that I think that we see the increase in the average age of our producers, is that it's just been too fun, they're having too much fun and aren't ready to
Tim, you have a comment on that
yeah, I'd
crisis
add to
issue?
That. Don't farm in fear. If the bottom 20% of farmers are making money, is that maybe a little too easy? And being a young buck, high debt load, a taste for brand new paint, and I'm making money, wow. It's got to be really easy for the established guy that has a bunch of equity in ground and a cow herd paid for and a house. So don't farm in fear. You do produce commodities in an exogenous production. That's an environment where things are out of your control, and we're sitting here wanting to control everything. So you got to remember that you're a low-cost producer, and the low-cost producer wins in a commodity game. So what's changed besides ethanol is that also we now farm more globally than before. Brazil produces as much crop as we do. It's both a good and bad thing. Demand is not going down. It's just not going up at the pace it did in the last 10 years. So the form at which we row crop agriculture in the future, animal agriculture is a little different. The form at which we row crop agriculture in the future is going to have to change a little bit. I have to raise corn a lot cheaper than my established neighbor, which means I have to do something different than the way my dad did it, which means there will be conflict on our farm.
I might make a comment or two on your question, too, about whether we're in a farm crisis. And as the panel said, that probably depends on your definition and where you sit. But I started teaching at Drake in 1983, which was just as we were sliding right into the soup. And, as I read the articles today, everyone talks about how things are different and we don't have the same debt-to-asset ratios and we're not as highly leveraged. And that may well be true. But, there are other things that have changed as well. And, in fact, the committee that I mentioned that Chris and I served on was focused on the issue of land tenure. And one of the things that has certainly continued to change in the 35 years is the structure of land ownership in the state. Movement of more land into the hands of non-operator landowners, many of them former family members, but who aren't farming. More land being farmed under leases, much more of that under cash rents, which are much stickier, it appears, than land values in terms of their fluctuation. And so things may be different, but I think some of the potential problems also might arise from a different structure of agriculture. And we had a question right back there. Yes.
There's a lot of discussion about the next generation of farmers and beginning farmers. I'm of that generation of people who were growing up and had friends who farmed in the 80s and 90s, and they ended up having to quit farming. They were the ones that were the casualties of the farm crisis, and many of them had a passion for farming. They were good at it, very good at it. They went to college, they got degrees in all the right areas, and some of them couldn't go into farming because the bankers wouldn't let them. It seems like some of them would love to farm again. They went to town, they got a job in a factory or some other place. They worked for 10, 15, 20 years, and then they got laid off. There's a lot of discussion about the forgotten generation. Those people are part of that forgotten generation. They've been pushed out of jobs several times. Why not try to help them get back into farming too?
Well, certainly, I think when people think about new and beginning farmers, they oftentimes, make a connection with young farmers, and that's certainly part of it. But Chris, for example, your lending programs don't discriminate on the basis of age. We've done a lot of work at Drake, as others have, and Madeline on farmer-veteran connection, a lot of people coming back out of the military service. And so, one of the things that can come along with that age and is some experience and perhaps some wealth that's been built up that can be used as a down payment. But comments about that whole issue? I mean, I would think that the mentorship opportunities are as valuable for them as for anyone.
From a small business perspective, broadly, we call it encore entrepreneurship, which is someone that is leaving a profession and coming, and then they start a business in later years of their life for any number of reasons. But there's a whole support structure for older generations of people that want to start a new business, which would include farming and ranching. And perhaps not in Iowa, but I know when we've had these conversations in a lot of the urban areas, the urban agriculture movement is actually being taken up a lot by older people that are getting into agriculture for the first time, and they're growing food on the rooftops of a New York City building, and it's often not the millennials doing that. So it's I think it's open, and the support is there for anyone ready and willing to do that.
And I would just add to that, we talk about the average age of a farmer is 58, 59 years old, and I think that's a good attention getter, but I haven't really, to be frank, been that concerned about that, simply because people are living longer, number one, and number two, we see a lot of people that are either coming back to farming after being out of it, or they've gone to town. I mean, there are some farmers that tell their kids, go to town and get a job, and if you don't like it, after 5 years, you can come back. So we see a lot of people in their 30s and 40s coming back. So certainly, sir, the loan programs at FSA, I'm sure Mike will tell you at the bank, if somebody wants to get back into farming, certainly probably wouldn't be qualified as technically as a beginning farmer any longer, but that doesn't mean the programs aren't available to you.
I thought I was looking at some information before I came here to this summit, but I was just curious. Our former bank president is now the superintendent of banking in Iowa, and I was asking him for a little bit of information about what has been the agricultural lending activity in the state since this farm economy has turned a little bit soft. And in the last 3 years, Iowa banks have increased their lending by almost, actually it was just a little over $1 billion of additional ag loans in the state of Iowa that was put onto the balance sheets of our community banks and rural banks in the state. That was, again, in just the last 3 years. And so banks have not pulled away from making agricultural loans. I think that for a lot of our rural community banks, rural banks, agriculture is their bread and butter. And that's where we make our money, is providing financing to our farm customers, because we don't have very many other options to pursue.
And I would just like to add that with our extension programming, we certainly are seeing beginning farmers of all ages coming to our extension programming and learning about different aspects of starting their new business. So there is a lot of interest in business development from all ages, certainly.
Great. Other questions out there? There's one back in the middle.
You're talking about current weaknesses in land values and within the overall economy occurring. What are you seeing as far as weaknesses in collateral valuation or in underwriting standards with all of the agencies and banks involved?
Yeah, that, we've seen, if you've read the papers and have, paid any attention at all, you know that land values are off of their highs. And we probably got to a point with land values that we really didn't belong at in the first place. We had some, kind of a perfect storm. We had a situation of some weather issues, and we had the ethanol systems kind of come on to play, and so we had really quite a demand shock to the system for quite a while, and our commodity prices, corn, wheat, and beans, really went quite high. We seemed to go into a kind of another, new era kind of a mentality, and we saw land prices go to places that they really didn't belong. I don't really, at this point, see that we may continue to see some softening in our land values, but I don't see our land values falling completely over a cliff like we saw in the 1980s. At this point, there's still a fair amount of financial stability among the greater share of our farm producers out there. There's still demand for farmland. And strong demand for farmland, and we still see some sales that continue to bring some pretty strong values. The equipment market has changed quite a bit. The older lines of machinery have continued to maintain some fairly strong values. The late model stuff, the larger late model stuff is obviously it's struggling right now to maintain some values. But there will be a point when some of this equipment will have to be replaced out of necessity. It won't last forever. And there are, I could not begin to explain where the economies are as to when it pays to continue to repair versus when does it pay to replace. But it might be a good topic for some SCORE person to mentor somebody on. But eventually, we will see some leveling off on these equipment values and get back to where we need to be again. But for the moment, until we see some profitability return back to our producers, we're probably going to continue to see some softening of our equipment values and demand for the equipment.
Can I
Chris?
add to that? I just came from Steve Johnson with ISU Extension's meeting yesterday, talking about land rental agreements and ownership. And if you are a landowner and you cash rent your ground, you do have first right to the crop if you file a UCC1 filing. It would put you in front of the bank. The other thing is when you take cash rent, how much risk as a landowner do you have in that year's crop? Essentially none, as long as you get paid early before the crops are put in. So if you want more for your ground than what cash rent is willing to pay, then you need to accept more risk in that too. That means crop sharing or custom farming or any of those avenues that go down. But if you don't want to plant the crop, harvest the crop, spray it 3 times, scout it, market it, insure it, capital investment that goes with it, and all the time, then that's why there's cash rent. And I think sometimes we get really happy where we're at and we forget that. And Steve is pretty blunt about it, but it's refreshing to hear every once in a while.
Great. Tim, do you have a comment on the collateral
Let's see if we have
issue?
another question. If
Sure.
not, I'll comment on it.
Looks like we have one back here.
Yeah, I'm going to be a senior in agricultural business at Iowa State, and I'm going to graduate in May of 2018. And I was just wondering, just from your guys' perspective, Is right now a good time to go back into farming? I guess I'd be a third-generation farmer, hopefully landowner. Would right now be the best time? And if you were me, would you go back to the farm? Yes or no, and why, please? Anybody?
I will start with that. So first of all, just remind everyone that we want to feed 9 billion people by the year 2050. And we need all of the bright young farmers like you that we can in this industry. So I really see a bright future and just an incredible need for you to enter this business.
I'd say yes. You just have to really be willing to work hard and accept a lot of disappointment along the way. And most successful young bucks in agriculture do something to subsidize their farm as well. They're selling short line machinery, they're custom farming, they have a cattle herd on the side, they're a show business. They're doing something else to help along the way. And that mitigates a little bit of that production risk because you only get one crop a year. So I need something to live off of if my crop is not profitable that year. So if you're willing to do that, you're willing to put in that hard of work and then bring your family along with, I'd say yes. But just realize you have to work harder than almost anybody else.
And I would just add to that, in addition to the work, I mean, certainly it sounds like you've got, you're going to have the education. It sounds like you've got some opportunities for land ownership, which you're already a leg up on. A lot of people who get into farming, but we had a loan officer that worked for us for 50 years and just retired, and he had this saying that he says, you have to want to farm more than a drowning man wants to breathe. So I would ask you the question back is, what's in your heart and your soul? How bad do you want to do it? And if you want to do it, I'd say go for it. If you're on the fence on it, I would not recommend it.
I would ask that exact same question. Is that your passion? And if it's a yes, then do it. And if not, think about it.
Yeah, some of the best opportunities that I had to put people into agriculture were in the middle of the 1980s. Sure. We already knew what the mistakes were, and so they, were able to establish operations after, some of the assets had devalued, and there were opportunities for them to establish themselves at some very good times. They were rough times, but they were good times to become established. Today, you have to just do it smartly. And recognize that there are some risks that have to be mitigated and know what your game plan is going to be before they happen.
Well, we're drawing near to our time to close, but I wanted to add one comment, perhaps one of the dangers of letting a moderator speak, but we're talking on a panel about new and beginning farmers, and we're talking about access to information and technical assistance. But of course, we've skipped over the questions of access to capital and also access to land. And I want to speak to the land issue just for a moment because, and I know probably Ray and Elaine know what the story I'm going to tell next, but one of the issues I think that we face in Iowa and around the nation, but as you're looking at the opportunity and the need for new and beginning farmers, if we want them to have access to land, then current landowners need to take that into consideration as they're deciding what to do with their land. We've heard a little bit about the CRP program today and its impact on new and beginning farmers. It's important to know that USDA has a CRP TIP program, the Transition Incentives Program, that if you have land leaving the CRP, you can get additional payments for making it available to a new and beginning farmer. There are decisions that you can make, and the one that I'll talk to is that, and it's one that sometimes strikes farm audiences a little odd, is that one of my proudest days was the day that I sold the last piece of my family's farm down in Adams County. I'd been in our family since the 1870s, but I was proud to sell it because I sold it to Chris Gasser, the neighbor's boy. And my view was that Adams County needed a new young farmer with his first piece of ground, starting his career there more than it needed me, a former Adams County farm boy, continuing to own a piece of ground. And you can sell land, and you can sell it to new and beginning farmers, and you can sell it on contract, and you can make it available on terms that are conducive to people. And if we want more and new landowners in the state, the current landowners, we need to make room for them. And you know, it's maybe not the easiest decision, but it's a decision that we can be thinking about. And it goes along with the idea of mentorship, and certainly with farm transition and linking programs and the other type of programs that Iowa State and the Beginning Farmer Center have been working on. So any final closing comments by folks on the panel?
Yeah, just try to do this in 2 minutes or less. I've been on a campaign, and I really want to congratulate those of you here from Iowa that I think understand better that agriculture is economic development. Iowa and now Minnesota, I think just recently, are a couple of the few states where they actually have some tax incentives that a landowner can get a tax break reduction by renting to a beginning farmer. And I'm more concentrated on local communities. I was in Iowa about a year ago, and a crowd of about 200 people, and I asked for a show of hands of, these were mayors of towns of less than 10,000 people across Iowa, and I said, how many of you think agriculture is economic development? And only half of the mayors of these towns raised their hands. And I think that's a mistake that local communities are making. They should be treating young and beginning farmers as economic development, as the next kindergarten class, as the next confirmation class. The Chamber of Commerce should be thinking about the next shopper around their town square, and then get the states to treat them the same way and allocate some resources to attract young and beginning farmers to states and local communities. So whatever you can do to help spread that word and hold our officials accountable for treating agriculture as economic development, I think would go a long ways.
I would say that you know, one of the caveats, or one of the issues that all businesses face, is sometimes working too much in your business versus on your business. I was happy that Tim, you said you take time away to go try to learn some new things, because that's really important. And given that we're in the information age and we all carry every piece of information ever on the phone in our pocket, it's not about a lack of information. It's about taking the time to learn it, learn the right information, and then be able to apply it more properly. And that's part of what I'm excited about with the SCORE partnership with USDA, is to have another set of eyes, another set of ears, and multiple sets of eyes and ears to help think through that for all of the existing and beginning farmers and ranchers as we go forward.
And I'd just like to embellish one of the points that Chris made earlier, and that is, if you have a passion to farm, don't give up on it. If you're not sure how to go about it, find yourself a mentor. Find somebody that you can talk with about building a business plan to make it happen, and go for it. Work with your local bank and find out what's going to be required to get the necessary financing. But by all means, go for it.
So one of the past participants in our programs was Sarah Shepard. She's a young beef cattle producer. One of the things that she said is that it's such a privilege to farm in Iowa, because there's such a wealth of knowledge and compassion and just caring for our beginning farmers in our rural communities. So I do encourage all beginning farmers, no matter what age, to just reach out to other people in their community, create those networks, meet those professionals, and find the assistance that you do need to be successful in your business.
Tim, final words from our new and beginning farmer?
Being a young buck in farming is tough. It is tough, but it's fun. It's rewarding. And you get to work with your family, and you get to produce in one of the best states in our country. So,
those are great words to hand it off to Bruce. So thank the panel, thank all of you for being here with us this afternoon, and we'll step down. Good job, Neil.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the 2017 Iowa Ag Summit. Our next summit is on March 3rd, 2018, and we look forward to seeing you there. Again, thanks, and travel safely. Go music.